Oh, so funny.
I should start this interview by asking the question, what's a girl like you doing in a place like this? A girl from Cherubusco in the atrium at Borders Books early in November 2005. We're here together to talk about Busco, to talk about your writing career and a lot of other things. Carol Hoenig, how are you?
I'm great. It's great being here
Should
with
I identify you as Carol Sears? People in the North Country know you as Carol Sears.
That was about 30 years ago, but I think they might still remember me.
I hope they do. You and I have discovered so many things that are similar in our lives in the last 20 minutes since we met.
It's true.
And it's kind of bizarre. And I'm going to blow your mind.
Oh, Lord. Okay.
It's 10 o'clock in the morning on a Thursday morning. It's not a bad day for early November here in
No,
the
it's
North Country. You
gorgeous.
do remember what these fall days
Yeah,
were
I
like.
have boots on just for the snow. But
I don't think we're going to get a big snowstorm today, but Carol pulled into the parking lot, and I pulled into the parking lot about 50 feet away from her, and I looked over and I said, there she is. I didn't sing it, I just said,
you
"There
didn't
she
sing
is."
this. You could have sang it. I
I
would have
walked
enjoyed
behind her and shadowed she and a friend of hers from Long Island,
Yes.
did you say?
Yeah.
Into the store, and then we met, and it was kind of cool.
Yeah.
She has written a wonderful novel called Without Grace. And without appearing to patronize you, I have to say that I loved it.
Really?
My wife loves me dearly, in spite of the fact that we spend a lot of time together since I recently retired. But she doesn't like my little quirk of reading whole passages from books as I'm reading a book. So when she gets to read the book, she already knows everything about it. I did that with your book, and I would say that's a compliment.
Oh, well, yeah, absolutely.
You write very well.
Thank you.
I'm just very pleased
Ah,
with
now
the
you're going to
way
make me
you
blush,
write.
but thank you.
And I hope we can do that a lot before we're finished today. This is your first published novel.
It's my first published novel. I have another novel that I had a publisher with, and I wrote for this publisher with smaller pieces, nonfiction pieces, and the editor and I got along really well. He didn't know how to edit fiction, so I decided to pull out from the deal. So this ended up being my first published novel.
And vanity had nothing to do with that? You just
It
didn't
was
like him playing around with your stuff?
Well, he would say things like, "Oh, wouldn't it be fun if the character did this?" And I'd be like, "The character would never do that."
I hope you never turn this into a movie, or there's going to be a battle on the set.
Yeah, actually, it's being considered right now for Lifetime television.
Come on.
No,
I was being facetious, and
No,
now
it
I'm so
is.
pleased that I said that. Because
and who knows? Who knows? You know, if it ever really comes to fruition. But yeah, and my first novel is also being looked at for something.
wow.
Yeah,
That's
we'll see.
cool.
We'll see. We'll see.
To do this early in your career, you've already started your
My third novel.
third book, which will be called...
Early. Did you hear that? Early. I feel like
I love it.
thank you. Thank you.
But you always wanted to be a writer.
Yeah, I never dared to take myself seriously as a writer until I felt like I had to justify the hours that I was writing. And I was then married and raising 3 children and holding myself away in the room when my youngest went to kindergarten. And I felt guilty that I wasn't going out actually helping earn some money. So I thought, you know what, I should try to make money doing this. So that was, now that my youngest daughter is in her second year of college. So.
Oh my goodness, you look about 18. That's
Did you hear that again? Could you repeat that, Gordy? No.
that's amazing.
Yeah.
3 kids,
Yes.
ages.
I have a son who's 28 or 29, I forget. He's 28, and I adopted 2 girls from Korea.
Did you really?
Yeah, my oldest is
Blessings
22.
on you, little one.
And on them, they're
Oh,
just,
my.
they bless me. They're just, it's the best thing I did. It really is. Yeah, they make me laugh, which I love to do. And yeah, my baby is in college. Yeah,
I love it.
Yeah.
We're going to talk a lot more
Are
about
we?
this book, about you, Carol, and how a girl from Cherubusco gets to this point in her life. And I'm sure it'll be a twisty but wonderful path.
It should be fun.
Stay tuned. We're going to have some fun. Well, we're attempting a recording, not sure if the technology is is up to the occasion. Carol said, those sounds in the background don't bother you. Little espresso machine in there clanking and clunking. We're in the atrium of Borders Book, Champlain Center North, right offside a little coffee shop.
It's beautiful.
Don't you love it when they started putting coffee shops in bookstores?
Well, yeah, and it was Borders that did start that.
Of course
Yeah,
they did.
in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Yeah, absolutely.
It's very nice of them to allow us to come here today. You've had an association with Borders.
Yes, I worked for them until recently for about 11 years. I started as a part-time bookseller because I wanted to be around books, and I wanted to also be around my kids, so I made my own schedule. And then it wasn't long after that I worked in the events program and started working in our Park Avenue store in Manhattan. And
Oh, wow.
booked national events, worked with
Oh,
a
that's
lot
terrific.
of famous people. So
What
yeah,
fun.
it was a riot. Yeah, I mean, and all I kept saying to people is, "I'm from Cherubusco. I have no right to be here." But yeah, it was a hoot.
You know, the fact that you've written a good book is one thing. The fact that you're from Cherubusco, you're proud of your heritage, you've used local names, local surnames,
Yes.
as well as the nickname for Cherubusco and calling it Busco. I wonder how the world is looking at that. Has anybody commented on that?
I'm waiting. The book recently came out, so I'm very curious. And I realized, like my baby brother, who's 10 feet taller than me, but he would point out different names, and he goes, "Oh, you know, the protagonist's brother is Kevin Finley," and he said, "Well, there was a Kevin Finley. There is a Kevin Finley." I said, "Well, I wasn't aware of that. I just used the name, but
Any relationship to persons living or dead is purely coincidental.
it's purely coincidental." Absolutely, absolutely.
But it's so cool. I would do the same. I love to write. None of my stuff is published except a weekly column that I've written
So it
in
is
the newspaper
published.
for a long time. But I love North Country names. I love North Country people. I love the quality of life here. And so that's why I admire you for having done this. And Calvin and I have done many interviews over the years, including authors who choose to somehow mask the names of the places they lived in here in the North Country and change surnames, in spite of the fact that the books are autobiographical, to protect something, and we've never quite been able to figure it out. And that's
Right.
why we think this is so neat.
Oh, thank you. That's my fault as a writer, is that I believe that you have to be honest. You have to be true to what you're writing and to the story, whether you're writing fiction or not. And I do help other writers, and that's my mantra, is that be honest. Even if you get into dangerous territory, you have to be honest to your subject.
Oh, what fun is life unless you stand on the edge of the precipice.
Exactly.
I want, before we get into more about this book, and it's a delicious book, I loved it.
Thank you so much.
I want to know a little bit about who Carol was growing up. What was your life like as a child? Tell me a little bit.
Oh, wow. As a child. Oh, well, it's interesting. I don't even know if anyone knows that. I'm just revealing it here now.
Wonderful.
The opening.
Mark that down, Cal.
The opening scene in the book is about not Vicky, but her friend Brenda, who is coloring her fingernails with crayons in kindergarten. I did that. I wanted to have nail polish, and I didn't have any access to it, and I bet you my mom would not have let me wear nail polish in kindergarten. So I would color my fingernails, and then I would sneak it off, try to get it off before I would get onto the school bus. So that was one of my early memories as a child growing up here, but always wanting more, hungering for culture and other. I just knew that there was other things out there that I just wanted to see.
Did you go to Northern Adirondack?
I did, but when I first started, it was Ellenburg Central.
Of course it was.
Yes.
That's why I like that you mentioned local names. I'm going to interject little bits of my life here, and I certainly don't want to monopolize
Oh
this
no,
interview.
I would love this. This is
But
great.
I want to mention to you how absolutely thrilled I was when I turned to a given page in the book, and I have no idea which page, and you mentioned the name Messina Center.
Oh,
I want to know how you know about Messina Center. I said that to my wife. I screamed it out loud. She thought I was having a coronary in there.
that would be a
I
problem.
said, Messina Center, Messina Center. She said, why not? The girl's from Cherubusco. But how would you know about Messina Center?
I had an aunt who lived in Messina, my father's sister, and I had cousins from Messina who would stay with us during the summertime. So, and every once in a while on a Sunday we would take a drive to Messina to visit.
Did they ever take you to Messina Center?
No, for some reason that part just worked into it.
Well, you know, Messina Center could just as easily have been the focus of this book as was Cherubusco. It's a little tiny hamlet outside Messina, 4.5 miles, where I spent the best years of my very young life.
Really? Oh, that's
From age
fantastic.
7 to age 14. And it's a little community untouched by time.
Yeah.
And every summer we go camping up there just so we can make the pilgrimage back to Messina Center to see if the same names are on the mailboxes. So to mention Messina Center,
That
I
touched a
probably won't be the only person who's thrilled by that.
Oh, that's so great. Isn't that funny? That's when
So
you're-
you went to Ellenberg
Yep.
School,
Ellenberg Central.
and you started. What kinds of things did you write when you were 10 or 12? Or
Poetry.
14?
Tons of poetry.
Me too.
Really? Yeah. I think that most writers do start out with poetry, and I didn't think that I would have a patience to write a novel. I didn't think I had the talent to write a novel, and when you're young like that. But I knew that my writing did touch a nerve with different people and it affected them. But then you wonder, these are friends and family. You know, are they just being
Isn't that
kind?
always the
Yeah.
way?
Are they being kind
Like
to me?
your mother's going to tell you, that's the lousiest thing I ever. No, I know exactly what you mean, but you
Yeah.
need to be encouraged, and most writers, young writers and other writers, don't have much self-confidence at
No.
first. And you need reassurance.
It's only recently that I can talk about my writing without blushing. I used to, because it was like, that's your soul. You're putting your soul out there. And
People who don't write must find it difficult to understand that. But
I
you're right.
think so. You
You
feel
are
that,
very.
yeah?
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
first books, even though this isn't your first books,
Right.
but first books are, in large measure, almost always, at least in part, autobiographical.
Oh, sure.
So this,
Sure.
you aren't the only little girl that colored her fingernails with crayons. But it's wonderful that you incorporated it in the book because, I've had kids and grandchildren and great-grandchildren that have done that.
Right.
And when people can identify with things you're talking about, that's
Sure.
a good thing.
I think that's a really good thing. Yeah.
So you wrote mostly poetry all the way through high school.
I had started a short story, and my mom just asked me about this last night, and it was about a little boy named Tommy. And I think I had started when I was in 5th or 6th grade, and my 7th grade teacher, Mrs. Fritz, had read it, and it wasn't until I was a senior in high school that she asked me about it. And the fact that she remembered it blew my mind, that and I hadn't finished
Mothers
it too.
remember things.
But this was my
like that.
teacher who remembered too.
teacher.
That was amazed me. And I had never finished it, and I was working on other things at that point. I tried a play that I was going to do, not having a clue how one writes a play, but you just jump in. So
Well, it was your destiny.
I guess, yeah, I think so.
As you look back on it now, you're putting the bricks down.
Exactly.
You're building on the
exactly.
bricks.
Yeah.
So after high school,
Well, after high school, I ended up working for a law firm in Chateaugay, New York. I wanted to go to college. It wasn't. It just wasn't strongly encouraged. And then I met this guy who was from Long Island and fell in love, and we married. And I moved down to Long Island, and then I started going to school. So
where'd you go?
I went to Hofstra. I went to the new school in the city. I just took tons of writing courses. And an interesting story is that my insecurity about not having a degree. I went to an author's luncheon where Joyce Carol Oates was speaking, E.L. Doctorow, and Marianne Wiggins. Now, Marianne Wiggins at the time was just separated from Salman Rushdie. and the fatwa was just against him, and she was the most eloquent of the speakers. And I went up and introduced myself to her, and I said, well, I'm a writer, and I'm thinking about going back to school. And she says, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to write. She takes me by the hand, and she goes, write. Then just write. And it was sort of I got the go-ahead.
That was the epiphany you needed, huh?
Exactly, because, I felt like the Scarecrow in the Wizard. If I didn't have that piece of paper, I didn't have the talent. And I'm not advocating not going back to school, because I think school, you can learn so much. But for me, it just gave me the freedom to write. And
So you never even got a degree.
I never got a degree, no.
Who knows what you might do in the future?
I know. It's true. It's true.
I have a friend who started teaching without a degree until they found out.
Right,
Then
well-
he had to go back and get
Well,
the degree
well,
almost as an afterthought.
Well, our Pulitzer Prize winner, Frank McCourt,
Yes.
doesn't have a degree either, so, you hang on to these things.
That's very, very interesting. And to adopt two Korean girls.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful story. And
Yeah.
it's, as I said before, the road from there to here, or from here to there, is not always straight.
No, and it would be boring if it were. I like when different glitches happen in my life, different situations, and people say, well, that's a roadblock. I'm like, no, that's life. It's just life. You got to
So
live
you've
it.
read, besides the novels you're writing, this one is would you call it a short novel, 233 pages
Yeah.
or 235
I would say
pages?
pretty much, yeah, exactly.
But it's a plateful.
Right, yeah, there's a lot.
I don't know how else to say it. You wonder if in 235 pages you can develop the characters and the idea and leave somebody with a good aftertaste.
Mm-hmm.
And you did with me, so
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Well, I look at it more as what you leave out than what you leave in. I think that's important. There's a lot that, if you saw earlier drafts, you would probably be laughing.
I hate to edit.
Mm-hmm.
And that's from all those years on the radio where you write a news story and it goes on now.
Sure.
And then it goes in the wastepaper basket.
Yeah,
Or you speak extemporaneously as we're doing here today.
sure.
And if you screw it up, it's too late. When the
Right.
words are out, it's
Right.
hard to get them back in. When you write seriously, there has to be a certain amount of editing. How much
Sure.
in this book? Lots? How long did it take to write it, first of all?
Well, it's hard to say, because what I did was I worked on my first novel, and then I would put that to bed for a while, and I would work on a draft of this novel. And what this originally started out as, Grace was a mom in the house, but she was a character that had no purpose. It wasn't until she was gone that she became strong, that she was so powerful. I would say it took me about 5 years to write it, but it was in between a lot of other writing. It was, you got to put that distance between you and it in order to look at it with an eye that can be discriminating. Because, you can look at it, and the next day read it and say, oh, this is perfect, this is it. And then
I
two
do it
months,
all the time.
yeah, then 2 months, 2 months later, you look at it like, what was I thinking?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that must have been a very late night. So did you do a lot of editing at the end? Were there many drafts?
I would say total about 5, 6 drafts, and then I had a copy editor with the publisher who, I have to say, he was very complimentary. He goes, this has been edited to a fault. He goes, this is incredible. And the editing was very minor with the
Well,
copy
that's got to
editor.
be gratifying.
It was, and he was my first review, and I was like, oh, I think I might be onto something here. I was like, this is...
So it's only been out for how long?
It came out officially, we had the book launch in Manhattan on September 20th, but to get it into all the bookstores, it's still working its way into bookstores.
So we're recording this early in November, so it really hasn't had a chance to make the round.
Right, it hasn't had legs yet, I don't think. I think it's got a lot of time left for it.
Well, getting into the publishing business in the first place, after you've written something that you've been told and you believe is pretty good, is no small task, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes.
Right.
Now is the time for me to tell you what strange parallels the plot for this book and the characters in this book have with my life. We'll start with Messina Center. That was pretty
Right.
cool. Never before,
All right.
and probably never in the future unless you do it again, will the two words Messina Center be used
That is so
in a
funny.
book. And that is so cool because the community is only this big.
Uh-huh.
All these little houses, maybe 30 or 40 houses, are in this tiny place.
That's
And
so
you will
funny.
now have to go and visit it sometime.
I have to. I
So you'll
absolutely
have to
do.
assimilate some of the charm that I've been mentioning to you.
Sure.
Number two, I'm reading this book, and I'm reading about a woman named Grace who leaves her husband with two small children.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly that happened to me in my life. My first wife's name was Donna Grace.
It's so
But after she left
amazing.
me, we were divorced and remarried. She called herself Grace. And she was a
And
singer.
we've never met before,
We've
right?
never, ever met before. She was a singer and an entertainer. And when I came to the point where she was performing
That's
at that
so
event in
wild.
Syracuse, New York, I said, deja vu. It was almost painful, but it was so fascinating
That is
and
amazing.
so bizarre.
It's bizarre to me too because I wasn't sure what Grace was up to. So the fact that
Yeah.
that's amazing.
So is it, without getting too far out into
Sure.
another galaxy,
Right.
is it possible that we were in tune before we met today?
Yeah, I think
The
it's,
fact that we parked next to each other in
Exactly.
the
It's all
parking lot and I
kismet.
stalked you all the way into the store.
I ran really fast. No.
You were Carol Sears, you're now Carol Hoenig, but you also were divorced, is that,
Yes.
is that
Yeah.
correct?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
And our lives go on.
Sure.
Now,
absolutely.
you worked for how long for Borders Books?
Over 11 years. Yeah.
That had to be a good experience.
It was. It was a very good experience. The reason I really got into working in a bookstore, somebody told me you need to make contacts, even though you're a writer. It doesn't matter how good you are. I think you still need those contacts. Once it's published, then it's the decision is if it's really that good or not. But so that's what I started doing. And when we opened up our first store, well, actually it was our second store because we had a store at the Twin Towers. I worked at the Park Avenue location, and it was, it was a commute into the city, but it was worth it. My children were older then, so I wasn't, uprooting myself from them for any length of time.
It's very difficult when you decide, as I've now decided after all my other careers, to write, spend a lot of time
Mm-hmm.
writing. You mentioned something very early that also struck a nerve because you have to justify the time
Yeah.
you spend.
Yep.
And I have a little place in the back of my house called a river room where I
Oh, how
where I
nice.
sit, and it has 7 windows like this, right out on the Saranac River, which is 18 inches from the back of my house. It's a wonderful way for the muses to get in.
Sure.
And they do. They inspire me all the time. But then to justify all that time sitting and thinking and
Yeah.
sending emails and making those contacts and then writing and writing and writing.
Sure.
But it's just the process of writing is
Absolutely.
a tremendously gratifying
Mm-hmm.
exercise, isn't it?
It absolutely is, and like what you had said too, like unless you're a writer, it's hard for other people to understand. When I was writing this, I mean, there would be times I would come down into the kitchen and my kids would be just getting home from school. I said, "You're not going to believe what Vicky just did,"
Don't
and
you love it?
yeah, and they would, but you're writing it. I said, "No, when it gets to that point when the characters take over, it's the most exciting thing when you know you're on to something."
It's, once again, I have to reiterate how difficult it is to express that to other people because it's something you know automatically, but to
Sure.
express that and to finish a chapter or how many ever pages you're going to write that
Right.
day and then sit back and look at it and be amazed at what came out of the end of your fingers.
Absolutely.
Or off the tip of that pen.
Yep.
And it's something that makes you humble.
It does. It absolutely does. You're empowered as you're writing it, and then you hold back and, like, I'll probably read this again in a couple of years and be amazed at what I wrote. I won't remember it. I'm just sure of
That
it.
happens to me
Does it?
all
Yeah.
the time. But you know, you and I aren't the first ones to have this discussion.
Right, exactly.
Even though we'd like to think that we're
Yeah.
being original here. But I've heard other writers say that they're amazed at where that creativity comes from. When they finish a chapter, where did that happen? And that's why I just giggled inside when you said you won't believe what Vicki did
Right,
today.
exactly.
I think it's neat, and
Yeah.
this is a confession, and then it's your turn to talk a lot more than
No,
I am.
no, this is interesting.
I finished writing something not an awful long time ago that I'm trying to get published, and when I read over what I had just written, I cried.
Yep.
Not because it was so beautiful, but because it was so unlike what I thought I might write when I sat down.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Sure.
That's incredible.
It's raw. It gets right. Yeah.
It's
total.
cool.
Yeah, it is.
We're going to pause for just a moment again to make sure we've actually got something on this tape and continue this terrific interview with Carol Hoenig about her book called Without Grace. We have not changed our venue too far from the original spot. We just moved about 15 feet so the sun wouldn't be in our eyes.
Exactly.
Carol, I want to know as much as you can recall about how this idea for this book developed.
It's interesting because the idea for the book that developed is not in the book. When I was, I forget how old I would have been, there was a bank robbery in Ellenburg, and they killed the president of the bank, and I don't even remember the name of the... Oh, okay. All right.
Well, Roy, right? Roy Dominic. I remember
Thank
it
you.
very well.
I think that's
Yep.
important to remember his name. And my school bus driver, Harold Prevost, was in the bank at the time, and Harold had the most wonderful sense of humor, and as a young kid, you know, you enjoy a bus driver that is affable the way he was. He was in the bank, and that was the first time I ever saw him shaken up by something, because he drove the bus that afternoon. And but we found out when we got home, when I say we, my siblings and myself, that the robbers used our road to get into Canada illegally, and they had cased the road. So, in my mind, the writer always asks, "What if?" So I thought, what if the robbers weren't able to make it into Canada? What if they had to somehow get into that house on the road, and what would happen? And so I first created this family, put them in this house, which was the house of my childhood. It was the very real house of my upbringing. And every draft got stronger and stronger until I hit that point where with the robbery, then it didn't ring true anymore. And it took like 4 drafts into the book to realize it had no business being in that book, because the characters were living their lives, and it was basically them telling me, no, this didn't happen to us. And so that's how it started, and it may come up in another book, but I don't know that it would. That's how it started.
That was the germ.
That was the germ for the idea, exactly. And the mother lived in the house, but she was useless. She really didn't serve any strong purpose, and I kept thinking, why isn't she a strong character? And then until she left, and the minute she was gone, it was like, why is she gone? You know, how could somebody do this? How could somebody leave their children? And so it was like those questions I wanted to know the answers to, and that's how the story. And I had to be very honest with the place of Cherubusco and the upbringing and the sense of place, and of course, as a child, that's what I could relate to, remembering my girlhood days.
How, you know, I mentioned this before as early books being autobiographical, because you draw from your own experiences.
Absolutely.
But how much of Vicki is Carol?
Not a whole lot. I think, embarrassingly enough, I think a lot of it is Brenda. Brenda, who didn't like Cherubusco, Brenda, who didn't want to live in Cherubusco, Brenda with the frizzy hair. I didn't have frizzy hair, red hair, I had frizzy hair. I'm sure Calvin can attest to. But you go away and you learn how to deal with those things. But Vicki is not a whole lot of me. It's
Not an alter ego or any other
not that
part
I'm
of
aware
your
of.
personality?
Not that I'm aware. I would say that in my first novel, yet to be published, every character in that book, there was a part of me. I can see it clearly. This one, not so much Vicky.
That's the part that amazes me, where it comes from, how you can develop a character if it's not you or if it's not somebody you know.
Right, exactly. And it's Vicky is, maybe Vicky is someone I would want to be as a child. Vicky was gorgeous. Vicky, but Vicky wasn't full of herself, and Vicky wanted answers. Vicky wasn't shallow. And that's the part I think. I was never shallow, if I can dare say that. I really don't think I was ever shallow, although I wanted more. If that makes sense.
You've touched on some very insightful and profound subject matter in this book, either on purpose or inadvertently.
Sometimes it is inadvertently.
But they're important, and I love it. When I finish a book like yours, when I said delicious, I chose that word very carefully, because then it takes me a while to digest that delicious meal. Then comes the dessert.
Right.
Of actually putting those things in place and telling myself, this woman who wrote this book has given the world now some very important messages.
Wow.
And one of them is of this young woman who is desperately trying to find her mother. It's a subject that I'm so familiar with, having worked as a victim's advocate for a long time, where one or both parents leaves, and the child tries desperately to find out. And of course, you glorify the personality of who your mother might be, and the fact that she had the photograph.
Oh, okay.
Oh my gosh, it tore my heart out through the whole process. Right?
Yeah, that was I liked that element. I don't remember when that played into it, but it's funny because as you're mentioning this about her right now, I'm sitting here wondering if my daughters, adopting my daughters, played into the idea of their desire to get to know their biological mothers. And even though this was a blonde-haired girl and not an Asian girl, I have two daughters and they both deal with it differently.
There has to be a subliminal thread.
There has to be, and I agree with that, absolutely.
And that's okay. I mean, what have we got besides our life experience to fall back on?
Exactly. That's why I don't know that I could write about some outer space story. Number one, I would find that boring to tears, but I'd rather have something with a little bit of meat to it.
So how many poems have you written?
Over 400.
You have them all?
I do somewhere. I do have them. They're in my they're in my basement now. It used to be an attic, but now I moved. But and I do pull them out once in a while, and I shake my head. I'm like, oh, this is doggerel nonsense.
That's not a fair word. But I do the same.
Do you?
It's pathetic. Every once in a while, I listen to the first radio commercial I ever recorded, and it was. I wouldn't use the word doggerel. I'd have even a more basic adjective than that. But you develop as time
Exactly,
goes on.
and I think and I do know I touched a nerve. I mean, when my sister went away to college, I used to send her poems all the time because she said all her friends loved to read my poetry. Of course, I was the youngest sister, and that was an ego thing. And it wasn't until years later that I realized how important it was to her, because she lost her home in a fire, and she lost everything. And when I first spoke to her on the phone, and we were both crying, and she said, "Carol, your poems were in my house," and that blew me away. That they meant that to her.
Wow.
I had no idea that they meant that much to her.
Poetry is magic.
It is.
As music is magic.
And I also think it's very personal.
And it's extremely personal. And there's a whole field of psychology called scriptotherapy, in which psychologists have their clients write poetry or write something every day to help to heal, because as you said, it opens your soul, and poetry is the straight path to your soul.
Exactly, because each word matters. I think each word has to matter in a novel, but there's a little bit of moving around that you
So
can
when
do.
are we going to get this book of 400 poems? And you can't edit any of them.
Oh my Lord. Yeah, I had one that I remember during my teenage angst. I called it God, and that was the poem. It was just a blank sheet of paper. that was.
Ooh, how are we going to present that on page 1 of the anthology?
Exactly. You know, I liked to push buttons. That's part of me. I like to make people think. I don't necessarily think I'm right or wrong. I just think sometimes people need to think outside the box, and I think that's what my writing tries to do.
Yeah. I've read books with some similar themes as Without Grace, but nothing quite the same.
That's good. That's very good.
Certainly never read any book that had as its focus Cherubusco. But where did you think back in your memory for these surnames?
Yes,
Because-
yes, and I borrowed a phone book from my parents.
Oh, now this is nitty gritty time, Carol. I love it.
Yeah, I did. I took a phone book from them.
But that's what makes it so precious to people like Calvin and me.
Yeah.
Because, you know, the phrase is hitting home. These are
great.
familiar North Country surnames. If you had picked some from Long
Long
Island,
Island, yeah.
it wouldn't have any meaning but Cherubusco.
And there are some writers who do have that kind of writing books.
Well,
They'll
you know,
remain nameless. But
I mentioned Stephen King because he happens to be a favorite of mine. His mind is just as strange as mine. And
yeah. Oh, is it?
But
Let me move over a little now.
But he favors all those towns in Maine, all
Absolutely.
those places in Maine, all those people, all those businesses, all those route numbers, all those.
Yep.
And that makes it important for him, for the people in Maine, and for listeners too. And I admire him for doing that.
Have you read his book about his writing experience?
yes.
It's incredible, and his wife was so supportive, and he stuck with it. And look, he's incredible. He's absolutely
Well,
incredible.
since you're earlier in your career, and since I'm going to live to be well over 100,
Me too.
I'll get to watch your writing career flower and flourish.
Oh, that would be lovely.
And I love to look at guys like Stephen King, whom I admire, and see how his writing has changed.
Yes.
Up through and including his terrible accident when he was struck along
Right.
the highway, and his writing stopped for a while and then changed after that. Do you think your writing has changed a lot since you finished that first book?
Yes, I'm definitely a better writer. I think I found my voice. You always hear writers talking about their voice.
Yeah.
And now I can sit down. I wrote a short story about 3 or 4 months ago, and it took maybe 2 or 3 drafts where I don't feel like I'm draining myself to eat the story out anymore. I feel like it's a little bit easier, and I'm not sure if that's a good thing. But my third novel that I'm working on, that's taking me because I'm having a lot of roadblocks just because of life happening. But trying to get a first final draft of that one is taking me a while. But I think it's because I'm doing a lot of other writing too, so that might be it.
Do you write for magazines?
I write for a lot of e-zines. I've had a lot of publications for different e-zines and just different outlets and essays, that kind of thing that I've been doing. Yeah, which you get this. Well, the last several years with this whole political climate, I've had to do nothing but write. Felt it very important to write.
You know, we're going to stop for a moment and pause, give people a break, and from what I'm saying, not from what you're saying.
Oh, that's okay. Good.
And then we're gonna talk about discipline and what that means to a writer. So stay tuned. Interesting that I should mention that we would discuss discipline because Calvin's like, "Oh, we start now." We stop to get a cup of coffee and say a lot of things. A lot of things that we cannot and won't include in the official airing of this program.
It's probably a good idea.
Such as my connection with Long Island and yours and our lives. And I do think it's utterly fascinating how this book touched me. You hope that when you write something, it will move
Yes.
someone.
Absolutely.
Every word you write cannot be profound.
Right.
But when somebody comes up to you, and I try to be honest, as you try to be honest, and say, I really thoroughly enjoyed this book for all the reasons I've mentioned here, I hope you're pleased by it.
I'm extremely pleased. I get giddy every time.
Oh, I get giddy. That's one of my favorite words. You talked about laughter earlier, and if we can't laugh at ourselves and
Absolutely.
silly things that we do, then life is no fun at all.
I totally agree.
So let's talk about discipline.
Okay.
Most of the writers that I've interviewed say they have to discipline themselves to write a certain number of words or a certain number of hours in the day. I'm sorry, but my entire life has not included the word discipline very often in many things that I've done. But I find myself now with all this free time in my retirement that I have to juggle the household chores
Right.
and all the other things with a certain number of hours of writing, and I haven't done that yet very well, unfortunately. How have you managed to do that, or have you?
Have you seen my house? The discipline for me is trying to take time to do the house things. To pull myself away from my computer, that's the hard part. Doesn't mean I'm necessarily writing anything profound or wonderful or working on a novel, but I'm in front of the computer, writing, working on essays, that kind of thing. I have to start caring more about my house. I just bought a house.
Oh.
Yeah. And it's funny, my daughter and I were looking out the back window yesterday saying how badly the yard work needed to be done. And I said, well, you know what? We just put up some blinds and close them and it should be all good, you know?
Tell everybody who drives by, don't look over
Don't
there.
worry about the backyard. Just
Yeah.
look at my writing. I don't have the schedule that I had for my first novel. My first novel was I just had to get it out onto paper that I would write until 2 or 3 in the morning. It's not happening that way for this one or my third novel, where it's not where I have to get it onto paper, but I know that it's there and it's waiting for me. I guess maybe that was because a new writer. I was a little concerned that it wasn't going to get put on paper if I didn't do it right away. Now I'm a little bit more confident that it will happen.
I wonder if deadlines have anything to do with it.
I haven't been given a deadline yet, so when I was with Mary and Carol Higgins Clark about 2 or 3 weeks ago. They were both regrouping and laughing with each other because they said, oh, how much did you get written today? How much did you get written? They go, well, Mary goes, well, we have a deadline. And I'm like, I'm not sure how that's going to be when and if that ever happens for me. Like, I think a deadline will do good for me. I think that will definitely be something.
Well, I'll tell you what the inspiration will be. A $2 million advance.
That would do it. That would definitely do it. Yeah.
And we want something in our hands by January 15th.
Yes,
Okay.
Yes, but yet you don't want the quality of the work to hurt. I mean, I just think it's amazing. I don't know if you know the story about Charles Frazier.
No.
On Cold Mountain. He wrote on Cold Mountain.
Yeah.
First book, first novel, won awards, that kind of thing. And so he got I don't even remember the figure, a huge advance for his second novel, which was only based on 2 paragraphs. And he had to get it out by 2005, and it hasn't even been published yet. And I'm thinking, you know what, I would be like, don't give me that kind of money until the book's written yet, because I don't want that kind of pressure. I just don't know that I would be able to handle that.
It's something to consider, though.
It absolutely is.
One of the reasons that I retired at this stage in my life was not because I'm out of energy, because I have boundless energy.
Right.
And thank God, good health. But it's because I didn't want to be under the gun every day, having to produce a certain amount of something before the day is finished.
Right.
And at a certain time in your life, you enjoy not having that. And now you're liable to jump right back into that situation again.
Yeah, exactly. Well, again, to me, it's the quality. I have to look at myself and I have to look at what I put out there. I do not want to do a formula type of writing. I do not want to have, they know what a certain author's book is. Oh, well, we can expect this from this author. No, I'd like to keep the surprises there.
There is a literary contest afoot. I don't know if you've seen it advertised, where somebody has to write a 50,000 word novel in how many days?
A month. My friend's doing that, and she wanted me to be
You
involved.
gotta be kidding me.
Yeah. And I was like, well, if I were to do that, I would just send
What
my first novel.
institution would you have to be put into when you finished doing it?
Yeah.
50,000
Yep.
words in a month?
Yep.
I toyed with the idea for about 7 seconds,
Yeah.
and I said, are you crazy?
Yeah. This is the second year they're doing that. Yeah.
My only deadline is having to write a weekly column of 850 words.
Oh, really?
and That deadline suits me just fine.
Do you get to pick your subject matter?
Oh, yeah.
See, that's great. Yeah, that would be right up my alley. Yeah. That's great.
I've enjoyed it. It's for a local newspaper. 442 of those columns I've written since I
Wow.
retired from the radio business, and I love it. It's
great.
and maybe it is doggerel. I don't know. You know, I'm extremely interested, and these are things that I said when you weren't here, so I don't mind repeating them in your
Okay.
presence. I love the photograph. How much say did you have?
Oh, we have a very fun story with this book cover. Very interesting. I had a lot of say. The publisher sent me the first cover, a different cover, and it was a sunset scene, but in the clouds was like this image of this young girl, blonde girl, and I said, no, that's not quite
They
right.
didn't quite do it.
And so then they sent me another one with these feet planted on the dock, and it was a close-up of, you knew it was a young girl, you knew it was a young country girl on a dock. I loved it. I said, oh, that's it. And I showed my friend Peggy, and everybody loved it. They said, yes, that's the way to go. And about 2 weeks after that decision was made, I get a phone call from my friend Peggy from the Borders saying, Carol, your book cover is on Ann River Siddon's newest book, Sweetwater Creek. And so...
You gotta be kidding.
No. And so my publisher was, in a way, they were kind of thrilled. They said, well, they go, this is a good sign that, they use. So it turned out that it was from the Getty Images that I found out that they picked these images.
Oh,
And it wasn't taken off the site. And
oh
so,
my goodness.
me being a control freak to a degree, I went on their website and I put in some keywords and came up with a lot of different images. And this is one of the images I got. And I said, you know what? That's the image. And then I have to tell you, I am thrilled that it didn't work out with the other book cover.
So somebody took this picture for an entirely different reason?
Yes.
Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah, Getty Images. Most books, you can go to a website. So
I'm so naive.
no, so was I until I
I
found out.
had no clue, because I told Calvin before we started that this defines your book. This
It's
picture defines your book. Just the mood of the girl, the age of the girl,
Yes.
the color of her hair. Well, I don't know if that was changed for the...
right. Yeah, that was just it could have been, but I look at it, maybe it's sun dappled. Or
You don't
something.
even know where this was taken, if it was
No.
anywhere near Chattagay.
Not at all. Not at all.
Churubusco, or...
No, not at all.
Well, it worked out well.
It did. It turned out to be. Actually, my friend who works in the bookstore said that it's a very attractive book cover and people are drawn to it. So I'm happy. It worked in my favor, definitely.
Did you, before you finished the book, did you envision it turning out this way?
As in a cover, what the cover would
As
be?
in the whole package?
That's an interesting question because now I'm in the middle. I'm trying to remember what I envisioned. I definitely envisioned coming upstate and promoting it and the excitement of meeting people that live up here. That I felt was exciting. I think I did. I think, and this is the skin I'm comfortable in. I want to, introduce people to writing, and actually it's also a story of determination. I've had two literary agents, two high-profile literary agents, and they couldn't do what I did for myself.
Well, that isn't pure luck in your case. You worked in the business for a long
Exactly,
time, and so you know
exactly.
who to call and how to get it done.
Exactly.
And that's a topic that we can discuss a little bit for those people who are aspiring writers.
Absolutely. I have very, very strong intentions of helping young writers. I really think that everybody wants to be heard. I think everybody has something to say. And to get those thoughts on paper is an important thing.
You know, and we're going to pause after I make this point that I made to my wife the other day. She said, "Why do you keep doing this? You're at this point in your life. Why don't you just stop?" And I said, "Because it's not vanity speaking again, but I have something that I have to share.
That's
And if I make 5 cents doing it, fine. If I have to give it away, that's okay too. But
Yep.
I have something that I have to say. And I don't just have to say it, you know, I said it for 36 years to a little tiny audience this big.
Right.
Now I say it in a newspaper column that's this big with a few tentacles because it's on the internet.
Sure.
But the next step is sharing some of those inner thoughts with a larger audience. And in your case, yes, people are thrilled that you talked about Busco and about people with North Country names. But there are universal truths in this book. And they deserve to be shared with a very broad audience. And I'm sure you hope that'll happen.
I absolutely hope that. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
We're going to talk a little bit more about that. Stay tuned.
It's reflecting you personally. I don't know.
Calvin says, "I don't know why I'm fading in and out here. It's your age and your condition. The camera's just been fading
It's
and
the
fading."
camera.
It's
Sure.
a cool new effect that he didn't know going on there. You know, before we started our interview today, I obviously I'd like to find out if there's relationships, because I think there are threads that connect us all, one with the other. Some we understand, and some I guess we're not capable of understanding. But I asked you what Sears you were related to, and I told you that we go to church every Sunday morning and breakfast with Ron and Millie Sears, and you said Jim Sears.
Yep.
And
He's
that's
my
Ron's
cousin.
brother.
Yeah. I don't know. I must have met Ron, but I do know Jim and Joan because they had their daughter Kim, I think is the oldest one, who's my age, and then they had 8 more after her.
Everything's connected.
Everything is, yeah.
Connected.
Yeah.
Well, we found a few wonderful connections here so far today. But for the uninitiated and those who do this for a living, I'd like to have you explain a little bit about the process of getting something published. Everyone, when they finish something, believes I've got the great American novel here.
Yes.
And then what do I do with it? Do I, do I make copies of it and color a nice picture and give it to my friends and neighbors? Do I find a literary agent, a publisher? So explain
Right.
a little bit about how that process worked for you.
For me, well, I had my first novel. As I was writing it, I, like most people, thought this needs to get published. This is incredible. This is a great book. And I ended up sending it out cold to publishers, which, when you're green, you think that that's fine. I got some really nice rejections. People laugh when I would say that.
Is that an oxymoron or not?
Exactly. But, there's some that, like they're formulaic, and then
Yeah.
there's some with a handwritten note, like, well, you really need an agent in order to, you dumb person, you don't know what you're doing. And that was even before I started getting into educating myself, because when I realized this is something I really want to do, I need to educate myself. And so that's when I started working part-time at Borders and started working with events and authors, and I rarely insinuated myself in my writing with those authors because I knew that wasn't professional. But you keep their information in the back of your mind for future reference. So I worked on my first novel, and then I had a small publisher for the first novel I had written for him for the Long Island Journal. I did book reviews and other things, and we got along very well. But he was going to publish my novel, and he was going to help me edit it, and he wasn't just doing copy editing. He was say things like, "Wouldn't it be fun if she did this?" Or when I'm like, "Well, she wouldn't do that," and that's when you know your story is being tampered with. I don't have this ego where I think that it's perfect as is, but what he was suggesting. So I pulled out of that deal, which, in hindsight, I'm glad I did. And yet at the time, you're thinking, am I doing something foolish? But it was for the art. I was willing to not publish it under that way. So then I worked on Without Grace, which was actually called Place of Angels when it was first being worked on. That was the title I gave it, was Place of Angels. And then there were a lot of books being published with angels in the title. So I did find an agent. A friend of mine who was with a smaller publisher in the city read it, and he goes, well, it's too big of a book for our publisher. You need a bigger publisher. Got an agent, and the agent was a very high-profile, successful agent, which worked against me. She wasn't hungry. She didn't need a first-time novelist. And that's why with writers out there, sometimes it's better to work with a new agent because they're going to work hard for you. Mm-hmm. So then I got a second agent through a friend of mine, Mary Higgins Clark's personal publicist, read my manuscript, and she goes, okay, you're very talented, this needs to be published. Leave this other agent, check out this agent. The agent loved it, read it, but she couldn't send it out to many publishers because we didn't know where the first agent sent it. It's a business, and like anything else, it's a business. So I started working on my third novel, and then friends of mine and myself were starting a magazine called First Chapter, and it was for the struggling novelists. And we weren't sure, and we still aren't sure how to get it off the ground, but the people from iUniverse, whom I worked with for Amy Fisher's book, wanted to meet with us to talk about it, and my counterparts and friends told them about my novel, and they said, why don't you let us publish it? And I'm still with a little bit of the ego. I said, well, I don't really believe in paying a publisher to publish me. If I don't get an advance, that's fine. And they said, no, we want to publish you without you having to put a dime into it. So that it could either sit in the shelf, in my closet shelf, or be given a chance, and that's how it took off, and I agreed to do it. And they have been incredible. I have to say their authors that publish with them have been very pleased. So I'm glad that, because otherwise Without Grace may not have ever seen the light of day. It's just a rough time.
Sometimes it's almost pure serendipity. You meet the right person at the right time.
Exactly.
And an editor wants to butcher your stuff. I jokingly said, wait till it turns into a movie and you'll see what they do with it before it gets on the screen.
Right. But
you said you've got some things might be happening. I don't know how much you want to talk about that now.
Well, it's possible. Rona Jaffe, who also provided a blurb for the book, I don't know how many people are familiar with Rona Jaffe, but she wrote The Best of Everything. It was made into a movie with, I think it was Susan Hayward. It was years ago. But Rona Jaffe just came out with a reissue of the book, and she and I became friends. And she has a friend who's a movie producer. She goes, she's got to read this. She read it, and she's sending it off to Lifetime for consideration.
Oh, golly.
Yeah. So we'll see, because she loves it. She absolutely loved it. And it's funny because, you're metaphorically speaking, biting your nails down to the bit because you're wondering, okay, she obviously doesn't like it. I haven't heard from her. And then when you talk to her, she goes, oh my God, I just loved it, and the whole bit. As a writer, we're insecure. So if you don't get your back patted every once in a while, you're wondering, is it just sitting there? So.
But anyway, the reason I mentioned this is because there's so many different avenues.
Absolutely. Especially in today's market.
It behooves the young writer or the old person like myself who's now getting into the business to become a student of publishing, not only of writing but of publishing.
Absolutely.
To learn what the avenues are, to learn what the nomenclature is, to learn who the players are. And then to have somebody like you come here and say, guess what I did with iUniverse.
Right, exactly. I think that it's really the wave of the future. Being that I worked in Borders for so long, and how many books publishers would buy and then they couldn't sell, and that would be remaindered, meaning it would and you'd see the stacks of remainders. Now you don't get that with print on demand. And which is kind of good when you care about the environment and not wasting paper. Not that a zillion books, not that a zillion of Without Grace would not be a waste. But I think print on demand is going to be more and more the wave of the future.
Yeah, without somebody opening the book and seeing iUniverse, they would the average reader would have no clue
Right.
as to what process you went through. Only the initiated would go in and say, iUniverse.
Right.
But actually, I've heard a lot of good reports about iUniverse,
Yeah.
especially lately since I knew your book was published through them.
Oh, that's good.
Because, I'm on a fishing expedition, and there are lots of other people. Actually, we have some pretty good authors here in the North Country, generally speaking, as a region. And most of those people who write books from this area are content to promote them in this area.
Sure.
I think yours deserves that wider audience. And again, I'm not trying to patronize you, but because I think it's a good book.
Thank you.
And I hope it does it, if not through more general distribution, I hope it does it through television, Lifetime. That would be so neat.
Well,
I'll cheer. I'll be your.
Will you? That would be great.
I'll be
Thank
your
you.
cheerleader.
Thank you. Well, it's funny because when I told my daughter about it, I was like, again, giddy. The possibility, of course, seeing it on screen would probably be totally nothing like what the book is, but, just show me the money at this point so I can enjoy my writing time. But when I told her that, she said, oh, I see that on the big screen.
I do too.
Yeah.
But it's the perfect size for a television movie.
Right, exactly.
It's the perfect. It's something that a screenwriter for television could really
Sure.
get in his grip, and maybe they'll hire you to write the screenplay.
Well, the thing is with the screenplay, I tried to write a screenplay for my first novel. I'm friends with somebody who's very well connected. And he said, just write the screenplay for my first novel. I hated it. I love the language. And with a screenplay, you just don't have that language, and you just have camera angles. Now, mentally, I have the image for how the movie would open for this book, but we'll have to see. I have it. I have the soundtrack. I have the whole thing. It's right there.
In your head.
In my head, yeah.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Now you can be like Grace and just sing it out for us.
No, you don't want me to sing. That's one thing you don't want me to do.
So, I'm not sure if you're telling people that this is the way you should go with the first book, or if they should go through the process of trying to find that new agent who's hungry enough.
I would say yes. If they don't, see, for me, this made sense because I do have connections with them, with the industry, and I'm able to get my book on the bookshelves of a lot of the border stores because I know the buyer. and I was able to send her the initial reviews, and it doesn't hurt. We haven't touched upon this at all, but that I got blurbs from some people in the business that know, and they gave me some real, compared it to To Kill a Mockingbird.
I thought that was so neat. I said, how much did she pay for this one? That's so great.
Not a dime. And and a lot of people don't realize that in the business, when publishers like Simon & Schuster will have an author, they'll get other Simon & Schuster authors too. But I just went out to people I knew and asked if they would read, and my friend Peggy's cousin is Michael Malone, and he wrote for One Life to Live, and great writer of Handling Sin, and he gave me them, comparing it to Scout Finch.
I know.
Come on.
That's pretty neat. So that helps.
Yeah, that definitely. I think
contacts account for a lot.
Right. So for the first, like you were asking me about, like if you're a new writer, I would say if you don't have the contacts and the connections, try to get an agent. Try to get a hungry agent, and try to go that route. If you're able to work effortlessly and put all this effort into it, then do it this way. But you have to have the connections. I know so many people who have done print on demand who just it's rough. It's rough to get, because without distribution, it's going to be rough.
We mentioned iUniverse because this is the company you're working with.
Right.
And I would be remiss if I let this interview end without mentioning that there are a lot of, let me just say, unscrupulous players
Yes.
in this publishing business who will play on this vanity. And then,
Absolutely.
The only way your book is going to be promoted is if you buy 500 copies.
Exactly. Exactly.
At a slightly reduced rate of an already on an overinflated price, and
Sure,
sell them
sure.
to your friends and neighbors. And one
Right.
thing for you to call your friends and say, "Can you do a review?"
Sure.
It's another thing when you have to call your friends and have them buy a book.
Right, exactly. No, yeah, I would say you have to be really cautious. And you're right, they do play on that. And no, I would never suggest going that route. I don't think that's the way. I mean, if you have a family story that you want to give down to the generations to come and you just want to print up a few copies, that may be the way to go, but not if you're looking to get attention for your writing from the general public.
Now, when you started promoting this book, you've come up here. Have you had a book signing here yet?
No, it'll be Saturday.
This Saturday,
Yeah,
okay.
mhm.
So you didn't come here just to be interviewed by Gordy Little and
Oh, no,
Calvin,
yes, I did.
Calvin
Yes, I did.
Cathcart.
It just so happened. No.
But will you do this elsewhere on the island?
Yes. Well, I've already done, I've done, well, we had the big book launch party at the Small Press Center in Manhattan, and it was a very competitive night because there was a lot of events going on for Hurricane Katrina that were,
Oh, my.
but you know what, when you're in
That's
Manhattan.
unfair competition,
Yes,
isn't it?
exactly,
Yeah.
but you know, I had about 100 people. A lot of people in the business came, and I threw myself the party. I knew that I had to throw myself, and I'm on the advisory council at the Small Press Center, and it's in this gorgeous landmark building, which is filled with books, and it's the smell of musty books, and it was, and I did get some press. I was able to manage to get a little bit of press for that, not a lot. You know, never get the New York Times.
Not front page on the New
No,
York
no,
Times
yeah,
book
no,
section, huh?
no, not at all. But it worked, and then I did an event at the Borders in Syosset on Long Island, and that was
I know it well.
yeah, do you? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's great. And then I have a lot of events coming up that I'm going to be doing. I'm going to Boston because I have connections in Boston, and I don't have any grand illusions. And this is for the young writer there. When you're doing promoting your book, if there's 2 people sitting on that chair, those 2 people are going to get what 200 people should get from me, because there's other things that lead up to that. You have more books in the store that you wouldn't have if you didn't do an event. You have the signage. You have. It's just you can't get this grand illusion that they're going to be coming from all over.
That's an excellent point, because most people who are writing a first novel don't know what would measure their success in terms of the number of books sold.
Right.
And in your case, what would you like to see happen within a year? How many?
How many?
Have you thought about that?
No, I have not thought of how many.
I've been talking to a couple of companies, and with this one company, their most successful writer has sold 5,000 books.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Most successful
Right,
writer out of
right.
thousands and thousands of manuscripts that they publish.
Sure.
And to the uninitiated, that might seem like small potatoes, but I'm sure if you could sell.
I'd be pleased. Yeah, I mean, just because of the, it's this book, it would be hard to get in every bookstore because it doesn't have a full distribution. So I get that. What iUniverse is hoping for this book is that a mainstream publisher will buy it out from us. That's what we're hoping.
So that happens.
Yes, that happens.
Do you wait for them, or do you have to promote that?
Well, just so happens the other night I was at an event where I've also helped with putting a new book called "Putting Your Passion into Writing," or putting something along that line, by Workman Publishing, and I helped with that book. They interviewed me for it, so I went to its book launch. And what they did was they had several agents and some editors there listening to pitches from would-be writers. And so that was interesting. But Larry Kirschbaum was there. And I've known Larry through different venues, more through Borders. And he is the CEO of Time Warner. He asked me what I was up to. Pulled out my novel. Said, "Here, why don't you check it out?" And I gave it to him along with the review, And he shot me an email a few days ago, said, hey, I still am going to be looking at this and see what goes on. So we'll see. You use all your contacts.
It's wonderful, and
It is.
you've laid the groundwork. As
I
I
have.
mentioned before with that metaphor about the bricks, you're somewhere about here, and I'm sure in a very short time you'll be somewhere up here.
Just to be able to write full time and not worry about where the next paycheck is coming from, that would be lovely.
So you have only a couple projects going right now in terms of writing, or do you have 3 or 4 or more?
I have several.
Several?
Yeah. And like when you were saying about computers and computer glitches, I really forget to save things on my disks.
Oh, that's something else we want to talk about first drafts,
Yeah.
because somebody told me save.
Yeah.
Save your changes.
Yeah, I
so
think
I'm
so.
writing first draft, second draft, third draft.
Good, because there are nuggets in each draft that I think you can use that if that doesn't have to change dramatically or can change dramatically, but you can still glean something from that, I think, and each time it should get better until then that's another question. When is enough enough? When you know it's done? When do you know it's done?
Boy. This sounds like an inane question, but are you a vociferous reader?
Not like I used to be. Because I feel guilty reading when I should be writing.
Isn't that interesting?
We
don't look at all alike, but in many ways we do think alike. And I was thinking about this morning as I grabbed a 1,300-page novel to start. This is embarrassing. I'm supposed to be in there writing.
Yeah. It's really rough. And I was a vociferous writer when I was a lot younger because I needed to learn the craft. And I thought, okay, there comes a time when now I have to do it. And so I try to keep myself on a schedule where at least I will read something before I go to bed at night along with what I'm trying to write. And then the wheels start turning, though. I don't know if it happens to you, but
all the time. And believe me, I would never presume to place myself on.
Don't listen to him. I'm sure
at your level at all. But I'm the same way. But I always carry at least one book with me, almost everywhere, wherever I go, because I sit down and I have to start reading, whether it's magazine articles, short stories, or books. And I joke that when I go on vacation, the only time when I get to read without guilt is when I'm camping.
Oh, really?
And you mentioned the St. Lawrence River, and I love you for that, because we camp at a place called Coles Creek between Messina and Waddington every year.
Coles Creek?
Coles Creek. It's a wonderful place that has all those things you talk about in the book and a lot more. But it also doesn't have clocks. Being in the radio business all those years, I was chased by a clock all the time. Every second had to count for something. When you're camping, nobody cares if you get up with the sun.
Right.
Nobody cares whether you have lunch. So I can sit there and read for 14 hours.
Wow. Well, let me ask you, do you bring a notepad and a pen?
I've only done writing once when I was on vacation because a friend of mine in the business died. And my editor at the newspaper called and suggested that my next column be a little eulogy.
Right.
Because I had already submitted a column for that week. And that's the only time. For the most part, though, I just sit and read, and I joke that my book bag is heavier than my suitcase.
That's not so bad.
I bring lots and lots of books to read.
That's great.
But there's a great pleasure in reading and a great pleasure in writing. And the two are connected, and I know exactly where you're coming from. So you don't take the time to read as much as you'd like to.
Right, exactly.
You listen to interviews by people like Stephen King again, who is so extremely well read. And even though some of his writing might seem a little rough or wordy to some people, sometimes he is still a craftsman, and I don't care. I picked up one of his novels this morning to reread and started looking at it, and I said, this guy is so smart. I'm embarrassed to even think that I might be able to write something.
We'll see. I used to be like that too. But everybody has their own unique voice, and I think that's,
Writing is a voice.
Yeah,
it's like somebody who has a song inside, and they must write that song, and they must sing that song somewhere.
Exactly.
Whether it's in a coffee house or in, a big
stadium.
venue.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, and somebody else could tell Vicky's story in a whole different way. And that's what route writing is. I mean, this isn't really unique. I mean, I didn't write any, I think everything's been said that needs to be said, but now it's just a point of view. I think that's my thinking.
It's interesting to me that you have chosen a fictitious place in Cherubusco. What's the name of the lake?
Oh, Benny's Lake.
Benny's Lake, but
Yeah.
then you said there was a Benny's Lake.
Well, there was a Benny's Pond.
Benny's Pond.
Yeah, that I do remember, a Benny's Pond. It was walking distance from my house, and we shared it with the cows. Had cattails growing out of it and all. And as I was writing this, and I knew there was a lake, and I thought, well, I think it would be interesting to give it some name. And then Benny just came to me, and then that's what Kevin, and the brother in the book, he thought the world of this guy Benny, whom he never met.
I think it's neat. Maybe his ghost will visit you sometime.
Right, exactly.
Who knows? Carol, I always, at the end of interviews, I like to ask people where they would like to be. And do you have a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan? I mean, you're a very young person, so you'll be writing for a long, long time, I hope. But where would you really like to be in 10 years or so?
I'd like to be comfortable, that I don't have to worry about paying the bills, so that I could have time just to write. And yet that scares me, because sometimes I think that you need other things going on in your life to make you an interesting writer, whether it be the angst of everything. I mean, the story with J.K. Rowling, she was on her last dime when she hit it big with Harry Potter.
We all dream of that kind of success story.
Exactly.
Do you like her books? I mean, you can be honest here.
I've never read it.
Oh, God.
I've never read Harry Potter.
Well, I love that. I like that kind of genre books. And I just have great... Oh, we haven't shown this yet? I thought she brought it to me. This was the original picture that was going to be on your book, and
right.
It just talks about
and
what
then,
we had before. This is the real book.
This is it. Absolutely.
You can read this if you want to. But.
Sure. I like Anne Rivers Siddon's writing, and no, I have not read the Harry Potter books yet.
I must confess I've read them all, and I read the newest one at camp last year.
Oh, did you?
I'm a pretty quick reader, and I can go back to, I told you I was kicked out of a few colleges before I decided on one. But Clarkson, I wanted to be a civil engineer, and when I went to Clarkson, the best thing I took there, besides a physics course that I was petrified of, was a speed reading course.
Wow.
And because, I was one of those people who pores over all the words. But now I read very rapidly.
Oh, okay, and you absorb it.
And I absorb it.
Okay.
And part of that was enhanced by the radio business, where you have to read a huge amount of material in a short time.
Sure.
When I write my column, I do sometimes hundreds of pages of research. And I pour over it and mark it out and then write a column.
Sure.
And then, you only get paid a certain amount of money for writing a newspaper column. You can't spend 50 hours on it because you have the next thing to do. So
sure.
I read quickly, and the Harry Potter books are delicious when you talk about that delicious meal.
Right.
Because they're so long.
Right.
But at camp, you get to read 10 or 12 or 14 hours a day. So in 2 days, you read the book, and you're on to the next one.
That's great. So you recommend that I should pick one up and read it?
You can if you want to. So what did you tell me? Where did you say you want to be in 10 years?
Where do I want to be in 10 years? I want to be working on my 10th book.
You want to be comfortable.
I want to be comfortable. I want to still be writing. I have to be writing. It's not even a want. It's just I have to do it.
Some writers are such introverts that they find it difficult to do something like this. You're a natural.
Oh, thank you.
I mean, it's comfortable. Don't you feel comfortable?
I feel
You
very
said you like
comfortable.
to be comfortable.
Yeah, absolutely.
I didn't ask the really hard questions. They'll come after we shut the camera off.
Yeah.
But the successful writers, I find, have to be out there somehow. I can think of a few notable exceptions where people were more mysterious because they stayed out of the public eye.
Sure.
But for the most part, now it's promotion.
It is. Everybody's just being, it's visual. We're so visual now, and sometimes it's overdone done with all the, you walk into a store and you just have all these signs coming at you and you don't absorb everything. But no, you're right. I think that you have to do something to get it out there. And this is great.
Well, I hope in 10 years you'll be exactly where you want to be.
Thank you.
And that Calvin and I plan to be here a lot longer than that, doing the same things we've been doing, I've been doing for a lot of years, and he's been doing since the 80s. So we'll do a chapter 2.
Great. This is so delightful.
At the very least, you have to stay in touch with us. Let me know.
I promise. I promise. Calvin won't remember, though, because he doesn't remember other things. But that's okay. But now we've got it on film.
Before you leave, we'll exchange emails so that we can stay in touch.
Absolutely.
Let each other know how we're doing. I want to thank you for taking time to visit with us on this, what is it? It's a Thursday morning in
November 3rd, yeah.
And it's been a pleasure. We've had a little bit of sunshine, so much sunshine we had to move once because it was getting in your eyes. But I'm thrilled to meet you, Carol.
Oh, this was very nice. Thank you for taking the time to talk about Without Grace.
I've enjoyed it very much, and even though your friend stayed over in the corner and didn't come, we thank her.
Yes.
Every once in a while, she giggled out loud and cheered as we said things that were humorous.
Right, exactly. She drove me up here from Long Island, so Yeah.
She told me to be quiet.
I love it.
That is so not true. That is so not true.
What would we do without friends?
Yes, exactly.
Brenda and Vicky.
Yeah, that's right.
What a combination of young women. I love it.
Thank you so
Fried
much.
vegetables. I can't make me just want to get a pot going and try not to burn the shack down.
Yeah, I would burn because I'm not a cook, but
God, neither am I. Thank God my wife is.
Good as spaghetti.
Yeah, good as spaghetti.
Yeah, that's true. Thanks
Carol,
to my mom.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Folks,
you.
just remember, without grace.
Thank you.
Have a great life, Carol.
Thanks so much. I appreciate this.
And who knows where we're going to be next time for our little corner.